I was told the Antarctic mission never officially existed. No maps, no after-action reports, no graves marked with names. In 1954, I was a corporal with the United States Marine Corps, assigned to a logistics support detail under Operation Deep Freeze. At least that's what the paperwork said. What it didn't say was why our patrol route kept changing, or why Navy intelligence officers boarded our transport ship halfway south and confiscated our personal journals. Beneath the ice, we found something that wasn't geological and wasn't natural. A structure sealed long before any human flag touched that continent. We were ordered to forget it. Most of us tried. I failed. And this is why Antarctica still doesn't feel empty to me. Welcome to Combat Lore Files, where the shadows of war live on. Hit subscribe and get nightly drops of stories like this. The orders came sealed and signed and heavier than any rifle I ever carried. And the moment I read them, I understood this mission was meant to erase itself. I was a corporal in the United States Marine Corps when my name appeared on a list that never touched the bulletin board. There was no announcement, no formation, no explanation. Just a knock at my barracks door before dawn and a lieutenant I didn't recognize, his uniform immaculate, his eyes tired in a way that came from knowing too much. He handed me a thick envelope, wax-sealed, stamped restricted, eyes only, and waited until I broke it open. Inside were typed orders directing me to report immediately to a naval transport departing within 24 hours. Destination: Antarctica. Mission description: logistical security for a scientific expedition. That phrase alone made my stomach tighten. Marines didn't get pulled from active units to babysit scientists at the bottom of the world. Not without a reason they didn't want spoken aloud. By noon, I was on a transport plane with 13 other Marines, none of us asking questions, all of us noticing the same thing. 2 men in civilian coats sitting apart from us, carrying no visible insignia, watching everything. The flight south felt endless. The roar of engines never let my thoughts settle, but the silence between us did. No jokes, no complaints, just the quiet understanding that this wasn't a normal deployment. When we finally transferred to a Navy icebreaker, the air changed instantly. The cold wasn't just temperature, it was pressure, like the continent itself was leaning against my chest. Antarctica didn't feel empty, felt occupied. The wind screamed constantly, a sound that cut through steel and bone, and the ice stretched out in every direction, white and blinding under a sun that never truly set. Our designated outpost was temporary, hastily assembled, and already half buried by drifting snow, like something trying to hide itself. The scientists barely spoke to us. When they did, their voices carried an edge of fear they tried to mask with clipped professionalism. What bothered me more were the intelligence officers. They wore Navy uniforms but didn't act like sailors. They asked questions about morale, about dreams, about whether anyone had experienced disorientation since arrival. One of them confiscated my journal the second he saw me writing in it, saying it violated operational security. That was the first moment I realized this mission wasn't about protection. It was about control. Nights were the worst. The cold seeped into everything, into gloves, into boots, into bones. The generators hummed non-stop, but beneath that mechanical noise, there was something else, a low vibration that came and went like a distant engine buried underground. I asked a sergeant if he heard it. He told me to stop listening. Outside the perimeter, the ice fields shimmered unnaturally, light bending in ways that made depth hard to judge. More than once, I thought I saw movement far out on the horizon, tall shapes distorted by the cold air. But when I raised my binoculars, there was nothing. The scientists called it polar mirages. The old Navy chief just shook his head and muttered that the ice had memory. Our mission briefings changed daily. First, we were securing drilling equipment. Then we were escorting seismic survey teams. Then suddenly, we were assigned patrol routes that made no logistical sense, circling the same coordinates again and again as if command was waiting for something to happen. Each change came with tighter restrictions. Radios were limited. Weapon checks increased. Ammunition was issued and reissued, counted obsessively. One night, during a perimeter watch, the wind died without warning. The silence was absolute, so complete it made my ears ring. In that stillness, I felt watched, not by enemy soldiers or rival nations, but by the land itself, ancient and patient. I remembered a line an old instructor once said about forgotten battlefields, how places that had seen too much never truly went quiet. Antarctica felt like that, except I couldn't imagine what kind of war could have scarred an entire continent. When the wind returned, it carried a sound I couldn't place, something between grinding stone and distant voices swallowed by ice. The next morning, Command canceled all scientific cover stories. We were told only this: our mission parameters had changed, and compliance was mandatory. No questions, no records, no personal effects beyond what we carried. As I stood there, rifle slung across my chest, staring at a landscape that seemed older than history, I realized it wasn't the cold that unsettled me first. It was how quickly Command began changing our mission objectives. Antarctica wasn't dead ice. It was layered, shaped, and listening, and the moment we stepped beyond the marked survey zone, it proved it. We moved out at first light, a 6-man patrol assigned to escort a Navy survey team toward a flagged grid several miles from camp. The weather was deceptively calm, the sky a pale, endless gray that erased distance and made the horizon feel close enough to touch. My boots crunched over packed snow that should have been brittle, but instead felt strangely dense, almost rubberized, as if the ground absorbed sound rather than reflecting it. The ice underfoot wasn't fractured the way glacial terrain usually is. It was smooth, too smooth, like something had pressed it flat from below. The lead scientist, a thin man named Halvorsen with frostbitten cheeks and restless eyes, kept glancing down at his instruments, adjusting them repeatedly as if they were lying to him. After an hour, our compass needles began to drift. At first it was subtle, a slow wobble, then full rotations, spinning uselessly like they'd lost the concept of north altogether. Radios crackled with static even at close range, voices breaking apart mid-sentence. We halted, formed a perimeter, and waited for instructions that took too long to arrive. When they did, Command told us to proceed anyway. That was when we found the tunnel. It wasn't a cave. Caves have edges, fractures, signs of erosion. This was a perfectly curved opening in the ice, wide enough for 2 men to walk shoulder to shoulder, its interior walls glassy and seamless, reflecting our headlamps back at us in pale halos. I ran a gloved hand along the surface and felt warmth. Not heat, but the absence of cold, like standing near a running engine. Halvorsen swore under his breath and muttered something about thermal displacement zones. Another scientist argued it was impossible, citing pressure, age, and temperature ranges. None of that mattered to us. Marines are trained to recognize structures, and this felt intentional. We didn't enter. Orders were to observe only. As we marked coordinates, the ice beneath the tunnel pulsed faintly, a vibration that traveled up through my legs and settled in my chest. It wasn't seismic. It was rhythmic, like a distant generator cycling on and off. The deeper instruments went, the stranger the readings became. Heat signatures registered beneath solid ice sheets hundreds of feet thick, moving slowly, spreading and retracting like breath. Halvorsen's hands started shaking. He leaned close to me, voice barely audible over the wind, and whispered a phrase that didn't belong in any official report: preglacial anomalies. I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the ice as if it might stare back. Then he said the ice layers didn't match known timelines, that something down there had displaced them before recorded glaciation, before human history had even learned to count time properly. Before I could press him, an intelligence officer stepped between us, face blank, eyes sharp, and ordered Halvorsen back to the equipment. From that moment on, the scientist stopped speaking entirely. He followed instructions, logged data, and avoided eye contact, like a man who'd already been warned. As we advanced farther, the terrain continued to defy expectation. Smooth corridors opened and vanished as we shifted angles, optical illusions that resolved into real passages when viewed from specific points. Snowdrifts arranged themselves in unnatural symmetry. The vibration beneath us intensified, low enough to feel rather than hear. One Marine swore he could feel it sinking with his heartbeat. Another complained of nausea and headaches. My own thoughts felt slightly delayed, like my mind was wading through thick water. When we reached the final survey marker, the ground hummed audibly, a deep thrumming that rolled through the ice like distant thunder trapped underground. Our boots vibrated. Snow fell from nothing above us. Halvorsen dropped his equipment and backed away, eyes wide, lips moving silently. The intelligence officer raised his radio, but whatever signal he tried to send dissolved into static. For the first time since landing on the continent, command didn't respond immediately. When they finally did, their tone had changed. No more talk of surveys or research. We were ordered to pull back, mark nothing, record nothing, and prepare for redeployment to a different grid. As we retreated, I looked back once more at the smooth tunnel entrance. It was already sealing itself, frost creeping inward, erasing the opening as if it had never existed. The hum followed us all the way back to camp, fading only when we crossed the perimeter line. That night, armed guards were doubled. Scientific personnel were confined to quarters. And in the command tent, new maps replaced the old ones, blank where our patrol had walked. When the ground started humming beneath our boots, command finally stopped calling it a survey. The wind carried voices that night, and none of them belonged to the living men standing in the snow beside me. After the patrol was scrubbed and the maps quietly replaced, the camp settled into a tense imitation of routine. Nobody spoke about the tunnel. Nobody mentioned the humming. Orders came down to maintain perimeter security and assist the scientists as if nothing had happened. But the rhythm of the base was off. Conversations died when intelligence officers passed. Guards lingered too long at tent flaps. Sleep became shallow and restless, broken by the constant howl of the polar wind clawing at the structures like something trying to get inside. That wind had a way of changing tone at night, rising and falling in uneven patterns, sometimes dropping so suddenly it felt like the world had stopped breathing. On my second night after the patrol, I was assigned exterior watch near the fuel depot, bundled so tightly I could barely turn my head. The darkness wasn't complete. Antarctica never truly sleeps, but the light was wrong, stretched thin across the ice, flattening shadows and making depth impossible to judge. That was when I first heard it beneath the wind. A low, murmuring sound, not mechanical like the hum beneath the ice, but layered, almost vocal, as if many distant voices were speaking through frozen mouths. I checked my radio. Nothing but static. When I glanced toward the science tents, I noticed a dim light still burning inside one of them long after scheduled hours. Against my better judgment, I walked over. Inside, I found an elderly Norwegian glaciologist named Larsen, one of the few civilians who'd been on the ice longer than a single season. He was seated at a folding table, hands wrapped around a metal cup that trembled slightly. He didn't seem surprised to see me. Without looking up, he asked if I'd heard the wind changing. I didn't answer. He took that as confirmation. Larsen told me the ice here was older than the maps admitted, older than the official geological surveys claimed. He spoke of early polar expeditions, of men who reported warmth beneath the ice and vanished shortly after. He mentioned stories passed quietly among Scandinavian crews, tales of hollow places beneath the ice sheet, of ancient builders who fled the surface when the world froze. He never used the word civilization, but that's what he meant. I asked him why he was telling me this. He finally looked up, eyes clouded with fear and certainty. Because soldiers listen when scientists are ordered not to speak, he said. The wind outside rose suddenly, rattling the tent walls. Larsen leaned closer and lowered his voice, explaining that certain ice formations didn't occur naturally, that smooth internal surfaces and thermal anomalies suggested prolonged internal activity. When I asked what kind, he stopped. The cup rattled harder in his hands. He told me the locals, Inuit sailors and old polar crews, believed the ice was a lid, not a tomb. That something beneath it moved slowly, deliberately, waiting out epochs the way men waited out winters. Before I could ask anything else, the tent flap snapped open. An intelligence officer stood there, silhouetted against the white glow, his expression unreadable. Larsen fell silent instantly. The officer thanked me for escorting the scientist and ordered me back to my post. The next morning, Larsen was gone. His name disappeared from the duty roster. No explanation was given. That night, the whispers returned, louder now, weaving through the wind with unsettling consistency. I began to notice patterns. When the sound rose, the humming beneath the ice answered it, like a response. Instruments flickered. Generator output spiked without cause. One Marine swore he saw frost-forming symbols on the outside of a storage container before melting away. Another reported feeling warmth radiating from the ground during watch, heat that vanished the moment he knelt to touch it. Command dismissed these as cold-induced hallucinations, but the way they increased patrol frequency told a different story. On the fourth night, the ground trembled. Not violently, just enough to set teeth on edge. Snow shifted around my boots. Somewhere far below, something moved. The wind died again, plunging the camp into unnatural silence. In that stillness, the whispers became clearer, layered tones rising and falling in a cadence that felt deliberate. I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the intent. It wasn't a warning. It was recognition. Alarms blared suddenly, breaking the moment like shattered glass. We were ordered to full readiness, weapons loaded, positions held. As I took my place on the perimeter, the ice beneath us cracked. Not sharply, but slowly, like stress fractures spreading through ancient stone. Floodlights swept the horizon, catching nothing but drifting snow. Yet the feeling of being observed intensified until it was almost unbearable. I realized then that whatever lay beneath the ice wasn't a myth sustained by fear or isolation. It was awake, and it was aware of us. Legends became irrelevant the moment the ice cracked open beneath our feet. We didn't uncover the structure by digging. It revealed itself, as if the ice finally decided we were meant to see what it had been hiding. The alarms dragged us out into the open before dawn, boots half-laced, rifles cold against our chests. Floodlights swept wildly as officers shouted conflicting orders, their voices thin against the wind. At first, I thought the cracking we'd heard was just another stress fracture, the kind Antarctica produced without warning. Then the ground shifted again, this time with purpose. Not collapse, realignment. The snowfield beyond the perimeter slumped inward, folding down like a curtain being pulled aside. Beneath it, something dark emerged. Not rock, not shadow, but a surface that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. As the ice peeled away, the outline sharpened into angles too precise to be natural. Walls, corners, a recessed opening that hadn't been there hours earlier. The hum beneath our feet deepened, steady now, resonant, vibrating through my bones like the bass note of some colossal engine. Command ordered us to establish a defensive cordon while the scientists were rushed forward under guard. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to retreat, as if giving space to what was coming into view. When the snow finally settled, we stood staring at a structure embedded in the ice sheet, its surface smooth and dark, unmarred by erosion, bearing no rivets, seams, or markings I recognized. It looked manufactured, but not by any human design language I knew. The entrance wasn't forced open. It was already open, a wide, angular threshold sloping downward into shadow. Warm air flowed out, carrying a metallic scent mixed with something older, almost mineral, like deep earth exposed for the first time. My breath fogged instantly as it met the heat. Halvorsen was there again, eyes wide, face pale, staring like a man watching history rewrite itself. He whispered numbers to himself, calculations that made no sense, then stopped abruptly when an intelligence officer placed a hand on his shoulder. We were ordered inside. I remember thinking how wrong that felt. Marines are trained to clear buildings, to expect ambushes, but this wasn't a building in any conventional sense. As we crossed the threshold, my radio died completely, not even static left behind. The walls inside glowed faintly, not lit by fixtures but emitting a soft, ambient light that seemed to pulse in time with the hum. The corridor curved gently downward, its surface warm and smooth, seamless from floor to ceiling. No frost, no condensation, felt maintained. Our footsteps echoed strangely, delayed and distorted, as if the space itself was swallowing sound. Every instinct told me we were trespassing somewhere we weren't meant to survive. Deeper in, the corridor widened into a vast chamber. The ceiling arched high above us, vanishing into shadow, while the floor bore faint geometric patterns that only became visible when the light shifted. There were no signs of habitation, no furniture, no tools, but the space felt functional, intentional, like the interior of a machine too large to comprehend. One Marine reached out to touch the wall. The moment his glove made contact, the hum changed pitch, rising slightly. Lights brightened. The chamber responded. Weapons were raised instantly, fingers tight on triggers. Nothing attacked us. Instead, the structure acknowledged us, systems awakening after a long dormancy. Panels along the walls shifted, opening and closing soundlessly. A distant vibration rippled through the floor, like something massive adjusting its position far below. The scientists exchanged looks of awe and terror. Halvorsen whispered that the materials didn't match any known alloy, that the thermal readings suggested internal power sources still active after an impossible span of time. I didn't care about the science. I cared about the fact that the place felt aware. The longer we stood there, the more oppressive it became, a pressure behind the eyes, a sensation of being examined. Then one of the corridors branched unexpectedly, a passage appearing where solid wall had been moments before. Command ordered a reconnaissance team forward. We drew straws. I lost. As we advanced down the new passage, the hum intensified, vibrating through our gear, through our teeth. The air grew warmer, almost comfortable, a cruel contrast to the frozen world above. The corridor ended at another chamber, smaller this time, its walls etched with patterns that hurt to look at too long, angles that refused to resolve properly. In the center stood a structure that might once have been a console or a control node, its surface smooth, unbroken, yet radiating energy. Before we could examine it, the floor shuddered violently. Somewhere deeper within the installation, something moved, not just shifting weight, but changing state. A low sound rolled through the chambers, too deep to hear clearly, felt more than heard. It wasn't mechanical. It was intentional. Fear finally broke discipline. One Marine stepped back too fast, slipping, dropping his rifle. The weapon clattered across the floor, the noise echoing unnaturally loud. The hum spiked. Lights flared. The walls seemed to tighten around us, subtle but undeniable, like a body tensing in response to pain. We were ordered to withdraw immediately. As we retreated, the corridors rearranged themselves behind us, sealing off passages, guiding us along a single route whether we wanted it or not. When we burst back out into the Antarctic daylight, the cold hit like a slap, grounding me in reality again. Behind us, the entrance remained open, dark and patient, steam rising into the frozen air. No one spoke as we established a new perimeter. We all understood the same unspoken truth. We hadn't discovered an abandoned relic. We had stepped into something still active, still functioning, and very much not empty. We should have turned back. Instead, Command ordered us to go deeper. The first door opened without being touched, and that's when I understood the base wasn't waking up. It was responding. Command didn't waste time debating what we'd found. Within hours, new orders came down, stripped of any scientific language. This was no longer an anomaly or an installation. It was designated a site of strategic interest, and we were told to treat it like hostile territory until proven otherwise. More Marines were reassigned to our unit, heavy equipment brought in under armed guard, and the scientists were placed under constant supervision. Whatever debate existed above our pay grade had already ended. We were going back inside, this time with full authorization and no illusion of neutrality. The entrance remained open, unchanged since our last withdrawal, steam still rolling out in slow, steady waves. As we crossed the threshold again, the warmth returned instantly, unnatural and unsettling against the memory of Antarctic cold. Radios died the moment we stepped inside, as if the structure rejected outside signals. The corridors looked familiar at first, but subtle differences crept in the farther we went. Turns were tighter, distances felt compressed. A hallway that should have taken seconds to traverse stretched longer than before, our footsteps echoing with a faint delay that made it sound like someone else was walking behind us. The ambient light pulsed gently, brightening and dimming in response to our movement, like a heartbeat adjusting to exertion. We reached the main chamber without incident, but the sense of being observed had intensified, pressing down on my thoughts like an invisible weight. As the scientists began setting up equipment, one of the side walls shifted soundlessly, opening into a new corridor none of us remembered seeing. No alarms, no vibration, just a smooth, deliberate reveal. Weapons came up instantly. Nothing emerged. After a tense pause, Command ordered a 2-man recon to check the passage. I volunteered, partly out of duty, partly because the waiting felt worse than the risk. The corridor beyond was narrower, its walls closer, the light dimmer. The hum here was stronger, resonating in my chest like a low drum. Halfway down, the temperature rose noticeably, beads of sweat forming beneath my gear. Then, without warning, the lights ahead flared bright white, forcing me to shield my eyes. A door slid open at the end of the corridor, revealing a chamber unlike the others. This one felt occupied, not by people but by activity. Surfaces glowed softly, patterns flowing across walls like slow-moving currents. In the center stood a vertical structure, taller than a man, its surface shifting subtly as if reacting to our presence. Before we could approach, a sound rolled through the chamber, clearer than before, layered tones rising and falling in a sequence that felt deliberate. Not random noise, communication. My partner took a step back. I felt the same instinct, but my feet didn't move. The structure pulsed, and suddenly images flooded my mind. Not visions, not hallucinations, but impressions. Depth, pressure, time stretching beyond comprehension. A sense of being measured and categorized. I stumbled, heart racing, and the sensation broke. The moment passed as quickly as it came. We retreated, shaken, and reported what we'd seen. Command didn't question it. They only asked if the structure reacted to us. That answer changed everything. The base wasn't dormant. It was adaptive. As operations continued, doors began opening ahead of patrols, guiding movement. Lights adjusted to our pace. Pathways shifted subtly, preventing access to certain areas while funneling us toward others. It felt less like exploration and more like being herded. Then we lost our first man. Private Collins was on rear security when he stepped through a corridor junction that hadn't been there moments before. There was no scream, no struggle, just a brief spike in the hum and a flicker of light. When we turned back, the corridor had sealed itself, leaving behind a smooth, unbroken wall. We tried cutting tools, explosives. Nothing left a mark. Collins was gone, erased as completely as if he'd never existed. Panic rippled through the unit, barely contained by training and fear of command. The scientists stopped pretending objectivity. One of them broke down, insisting this place was alive, that it was reacting to intrusion the way an immune system reacts to infection. That analogy spread quickly, and once it did, every sound felt threatening. Every shift in light felt like a decision being made. The base grew warmer as time passed, the hum louder, more insistent. Sleep became impossible. Even outside the structure, the vibration followed us, faint but constant. I began to realize we weren't uncovering an ancient ruin. We were standing inside a system that had never truly shut down, one that had waited patiently beneath the ice until something disturbed it. When Command finally acknowledged the situation had escalated beyond reconnaissance, their language changed again. New words entered the briefings: containment, denial, irreversible action. That was when I understood we weren't here to study what we'd found. We were here to survive it. After the first man vanished, the base stopped feeling abandoned. We never saw them clearly, but we felt them moving, and that was worse than any enemy I'd ever faced. After Collins disappeared, the tone of the operation hardened into something cold and final. Command stopped pretending this was exploration. Weapons were loaded at all times. Fire teams moved in overlapping arcs. We were ordered never to travel alone, never to stop moving inside the structure unless explicitly told to. The base responded to that shift immediately. Corridors that had once opened smoothly now resisted us, narrowing subtly, forcing us to turn sideways, scraping gear against walls that felt almost pliable under pressure. The hum beneath our feet deepened, no longer passive, but pulsing in irregular intervals that rattled teeth and blurred vision. It felt like walking inside a massive chest cavity, every vibration a breath drawn by something far larger than us. That was when we started seeing movement beyond the walls. Not shadows. Shadows imply a light source. These were distortions, tall, elongated shapes gliding behind the surfaces as if the walls themselves were translucent membranes. They moved slowly, deliberately, pacing us from the other side. Whenever one passed nearby, the air grew heavy and warm, and electronic equipment failed instantly. Rifle optics went dead. Watches stopped. One Marine fired a warning shot on instinct. The round vanished the moment it struck the wall, swallowed without sound or impact. Panic surged through the unit, but there was nowhere to run. The corridors rearranged behind us, sealing off exits and guiding us forward. The shapes multiplied. Sometimes there were two, sometimes more, always just out of focus, never fully visible, as if our eyes weren't meant to resolve their form. I felt pressure in my skull when they were close, a sensation like fingers probing through thought rather than flesh. Memories surfaced unbidden, training grounds, childhood rooms, faces long buried. It felt invasive, intimate, and calculated. One of the scientists collapsed, clutching his head, screaming that something was sorting us. The word stuck, sorting, as if we were samples on a table. Command ordered immediate withdrawal, but the base ignored it. Doors sealed, lights dimmed. The hum rose into a layered resonance that vibrated through bone and marrow. We advanced because stopping felt worse than moving. Then we entered a chamber unlike the others. This one was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, the floor marked with concentric patterns that glowed faintly as we stepped onto them. The shapes emerged here, no longer hidden behind walls, but partially revealed. Tall, slender forms composed of shifting outlines, their surfaces refracting light in unnatural ways. They didn't walk, they flowed. Weapons were raised, fingers trembling on triggers, but no one fired. Every instinct screamed that shooting would mean nothing. The nearest shape tilted, a subtle change that nonetheless felt like attention focusing. The pressure in my head intensified, and suddenly I understood without words that these were not soldiers, not machines, not creatures in any sense we understood. They were custodians, watchers. They had been here long before ice covered the world, long before humanity learned to wage war. The base wasn't a fortress. It was a station, and we were trespassers. One Marine broke ranks, screaming, firing wildly. The sound echoed painfully loud, and the response was immediate. The floor beneath him liquefied, folding inward, pulling him down without resistance. His scream cut off instantly, replaced by a spike in the hum that shook the chamber. No blood, no remains, just absence. Discipline shattered. Men backed away, shouting, some praying, some crying. I stood frozen, heart hammering, staring at the nearest guardian as it shifted closer. There was no malice in its movement, no anger, just inevitability. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pressure eased. The shapes withdrew, retreating into the walls, dissolving back into distortion. The chamber lights dimmed, patterns fading. A passage opened behind us, wide and unmistakable. An exit. Command didn't question the mercy. We moved, fast, dragging the wounded, leaving equipment behind. As we fled, the base seemed to watch us go, corridors opening just long enough to pass, sealing behind us with finality. When we burst back into the Antarctic cold, the contrast nearly dropped me to my knees. The wind roared again, brutal and real, grounding me in a world that made sense. Behind us, the entrance began to close, ice creeping inward with unnatural speed, sealing the structure away. Command finally spoke the words none of us wanted to hear. This site could not be secured, could not be understood, could only be contained. As we regrouped, shaken and silent, I realized the truth that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Whatever guarded that place wasn't hostile in the way enemies are. It was ancient, patient, and absolute. Survival stopped being about extraction, it became about escape. The moment the word containment was spoken, I understood that some missions don't end with victory, they end with erasure. Command gathered us in the operations tent while the wind battered the canvas like fists against a door. Faces were pale, eyes hollow, hands shaking despite the cold. We were down 3 men, possibly more if you counted those whose minds had fractured enough to be pulled from duty. No names were spoken. Losses were reduced to numbers because naming them made it real. An admiral I'd never seen before appeared via secure line. His voice clipped and distant, as if speaking from another world. He didn't ask what we'd found. He told us what was going to happen. The site beneath the ice was now designated a non-recoverable anomaly. No further exploration. No attempts at communication. The objective was simple and final. Seal it, collapse access points, and ensure nothing ever emerged again. The phrase irreversible action was used twice. I noticed no one asked about rescue or recovery. Whatever we'd left behind was already considered lost. Explosives were brought in under heavy guard, military-grade charges designed for demolition in extreme conditions. Engineers worked quickly, avoiding eye contact, hands moving with practiced urgency. The entrance to the structure was still visible, partially sealed by ice but faintly glowing beneath the surface, like an ember refusing to die. The hum was weaker now, but still present, a low vibration that traveled through the soles of my boots. As we planted charges around the perimeter, I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched again. Not with curiosity this time, but with something colder. Assessment. Calculation. The Guardians never showed themselves, but their presence pressed against my thoughts, a reminder that they knew exactly what we were doing. When the final charge was set, Command ordered immediate evacuation to minimum safe distance. We withdrew across the ice, the wind howling louder with every step, snow stinging exposed skin like shrapnel. I turned back once, against orders, and saw the ice around the entrance shimmering, the glow beneath it intensifying. For a split second, I thought I saw movement deep below, shapes shifting, aligning. Not attacking, preparing. The detonation came as a deep concussion rather than an explosion, a rolling force that traveled through the ground and into my chest. The ice buckled, cracked, and collapsed inward, swallowing the entrance in a thunderous roar. Snow and debris erupted into the air, blotting out everything. I was thrown to the ground, breath knocked from my lungs, ears ringing painfully. When the snow settled, the site was gone. Where the entrance had been was now a jagged depression rapidly filling with drifting ice. The glow extinguished, the hum finally fading into silence. For a moment there was relief. Then the ground trembled again. Not collapse, response. A deep, resonant vibration rippled outward, cracking ice for miles around, as if something far below had shifted its weight. Instruments spiked wildly. Several Marines dropped to one knee, disoriented, clutching their heads. The vibration subsided as suddenly as it began, leaving behind a silence heavier than any noise. Command didn't wait. Evacuation orders were issued immediately. Within hours, the camp was dismantled with ruthless efficiency. Equipment was abandoned. Records were seized and burned. Personal effects were searched and confiscated. Anyone who'd entered the structure was separated from the rest, debriefed individually under armed supervision. The questions weren't about what we saw. They were about what we felt, what we remembered, what we dreamed. We were warned, explicitly and repeatedly, that discussing the mission outside approved channels would result in charges severe enough to end careers, lives, and families. I believed them. On the transport ship north, no one spoke. Men stared at the sea, at the ice fading into the distance, at nothing at all. I couldn't stop thinking about the Guardians, about the way they withdrew instead of fighting, as if force was beneath them. The explosion hadn't felt like a defeat for them, felt like an inconvenience. During the final debrief, an intelligence officer informed us that future expeditions would find nothing at the site. Geological surveys would explain the collapse. Any reports of heat signatures or anomalies would be attributed to equipment failure. Antarctica would remain empty on paper. Before dismissing us, he leaned in close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath and said quietly, "Some doors are better left closed. Some truths destabilize more than they enlighten." Years later, I would understand what he meant. Because as our ship cut through open water and the ice disappeared beyond the horizon, I felt no sense of completion. Only the certainty that we hadn't buried the problem, we just delayed it. We left Antarctica believing it was sealed forever, until the debriefings began. They told me silence would protect the world, but silence has a way of turning truth into something far more dangerous. I was discharged quietly a year after Antarctica, my service record edited down to routine assignments and logistical support missions that never existed. No medals, no citations, just a handshake and a warning delivered without emotion. I tried to return to a normal life. I married. I worked. I slept under warm roofs instead of frozen skies. But the ice never truly left me. At night, I dreamed of vibration instead of sound, of pressure instead of fear. I'd wake with the sensation of standing inside something vast, something patient, measuring my breath. For a long time, I believed those dreams were just trauma finding a shape my mind could tolerate. Then the rumors began. Years later, I heard whispers through veterans' channels. Classified expeditions rerouted, research teams reassigned without explanation, satellites recording unexplained thermal blooms deep beneath the Antarctic ice that vanished before confirmation. Always dismissed, always buried, Antarctica, officially, remained inert and lifeless. But sailors avoided certain coordinates. Pilots reported compass drift over empty white expanses. Scientists quietly requested transfers after a single season on the ice. The legend grew without ever being written down. Among those of us who'd been there, it became unspoken law. Don't return, don't ask, don't dig too deep. What haunted me most wasn't the Guardians themselves, but the realization of what we represented to them. We weren't enemies. We weren't threats. We were a brief disturbance, like insects skittering across the surface of something too old to care. War teaches you to see the world in terms of victory and defeat, territory gained or lost. Antarctica stripped that illusion away. Whatever lay beneath the ice didn't fight wars because it didn't need to. It endured. It waited. It outlasted. The base wasn't built to dominate the planet. It was built to survive it. I began to understand the old myths differently. The stories of gods sleeping beneath mountains, of sealed caverns and forbidden depths. Those weren't fantasies. They were memories, passed down until language turned them into legend. Humanity didn't invent monsters to explain fear. We remembered them poorly and filled in the gaps. Sometimes I wonder if sealing the installation was exactly what the Guardians expected us to do. Predictable reaction. Fear leading to destruction, destruction leading to silence. Silence buys time. Time is their greatest ally. I've lived long enough now to see the world accelerate. Technology advancing faster than wisdom, borders shrinking while ambition grows. We drill deeper. We listen harder. We assume that everything buried is meant to be uncovered. That belief will be our undoing. Antarctica taught me that some places are not empty, just patient. Some histories are not lost, just waiting for the right mistake. I don't tell this story to warn of invasion or apocalypse. I tell it because legends are born where official records end, and because forgetting is more dangerous than fear. War leaves scars on land and people alike, but some scars are deliberately hidden, iced over, left to fester beneath layers of denial. What we found under the Antarctic ice didn't hate us. It didn't need to. It simply reminded me of humanity's true place in the long timeline of this planet. Small, temporary, loud, and often blind to what watches us from beneath our feet. If this account survives, if it's dismissed as fiction or folklore, that may be the best outcome. Legends have a way of protecting truths that facts cannot. Because as long as Antarctica is believed to be empty, as long as maps show nothing but ice, whatever waits below can continue to wait. And one day, when the ice thins and curiosity outweighs caution, it will not need to introduce itself. It already knows us, and it always has. This story is inspired by documented wartime reports, blended with folklore, and dramatized for narrative purposes.